All right. Well, welcome to our latest episode of Coffee and Code. This is episode 4. I'm excited to be here with a bunch of great Acumatica Developer MVPs, and we have some internal Acumatica developers with us as well. And today we're gonna go a little bit of different direction. I've asked Kyle, who is a brand new developer MVP. He's not brand new to Acumatica. He was at last year's hackathon, and his team did pretty well. I don't think they won, but
No.
I remember Kyle very well because he was the one actually presenting the solution, and he's been working with his father since he was a little kid, trying to break his code and tell him what was wrong with it. So although he looks young, he has a lot of developer experience since he was a little kid. So welcome, Kyle. I'm glad that you could make the call today and talk a little bit about some projects you've been working on. One in particular I thought was interesting. So if you can go ahead and just give us a little background on the project, and we can talk about some of the challenges and lessons learned from the development project that you had. So why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so I want to just have a chat today about the project I had with a company called Nextgen Genetics. So these guys do fertility testing on people's genetic material, essentially. So if you're having trouble having a child, then essentially you go to an IVF center. They combine sperm and egg and then take a little bit, like a couple cells off of that sample, and then send it off to Nextgen Genetics, and you essentially utilize the service that they provide and that service will then tell the IVF center, okay, so this embryo is good, this one is not good, and then essentially they can move forward with implantation and then, having a successful pregnancy. So these guys are a new startup, and they wanted essentially their entire vertical sort of integrated in with their ERP. So what we did is we combined their workflow, their billing. We pulled in scientific data from external testing machines, and essentially made a really robust piece of software that absolutely, they tell me, they bring in people from other companies that do the same thing, and they're very impressed with what we've been able to accomplish. So so it's been good, and really, we couldn't have done it without the platform. But I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the issues we faced, because obviously, everything went smoothly is not exactly something to not a very interesting discussion. So I want to first touch on essentially one of the biggest issues that we faced, and sort of how we worked around it, was we had to do something new that we hadn't really done before, and we had to design a B2C payment workflow inside of the Acumatica customer portal. And this was just due to the fact that there wasn't a readily available existing integration that integrated as tight as we were hoping for, that was available, and this was just due to HIPAA constraints. Really, that was sort of the limiting factor. So we went out, and I've designed many things, and I was like, yeah, this will be no problem. How hard is it to just take a credit card, take addresses, very straightforward workflow, and definitely got caught a little bit unawares. We even presented it to the client. We all went through it. We got a sign off from the client. We deployed it into production, and what happened was that they kept on getting phone calls from their customers, and these are patient customers. So that's, again, a B2C sort of situation. Their patient customers would call them up and say, hey, I don't think my credit card information went through, or hey, I don't know what to do here. And it was actually quite a bit eye-opening, that how different it was to essentially design UI for a B2B versus a B2C sort of situation. And working through that challenge, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how I would say working through that challenge is one of the toughest parts of the project.
And I think that brings up a good point, that we, have had discussions in the past about is that, developers in general, especially in the ERP, a lot of the developers here, working on, the back end pieces more than the front end. And people, have admitted in the past that they're not the best designers per se. And I think, Stephen, you had a comment about that, working at Microsoft and, how Microsoft approaches that and others. And Dimitri, you've also mentioned a few times, about some of those challenges. So I'd love to have some of that echoed here, just to reinforce, the challenges we all have with UI design and making sure our applications are usable. So Dimitri, do you have any comments there?
Yeah. I actually had a similar experience with one of our clients. They designed exactly the same. They designed a B2C payment portal on top of Acumatica portal. And what they saw is, again, their customers were not able to pay. Basically, they went on the screen and they see all the ERP-related terminology like business account, like payment method, and the customers are not aware of those terms. They are just like, where do I put my credit card? What is the payment method? I don't understand what payment method is. I only have my credit card, and it was not really possible to explain all that to all the thousands customers that they had. And what we've done with that project, we actually tried to redesign it. And what we've used as an example is standard payment forms that you have in your when, for instance, you pay for electricity. So we all went to our like electricity provider. In my case, it was a Hydro-Quebec, and other guys shared theirs. And we just designed it after that and took all the mock-ups from those electricity payment portals, and it was much better. It was familiar for the customers. It was the same design that they see in their everyday life when they pay for electricity. So since it was familiar, they were able to pay eventually. Yeah. So I guess one of the most important things here, and it's not only related to B2C scenarios, it's not only related to the case when you develop for B2C instead of B2B. It also relates to the scenario when you are developing for B2B as well. So you always need to understand who your user is, and in B2B scenarios that are also different kinds of users, right? So for instance, one screen, it can be used in day-to-day operations by an accountant or by a warehouse worker. And another screen, they never go there. The configuration screen, for instance. With the configuration screen, it's always a consultant who works with that, who prepares that configuration. And the consultant, first of all, he or she understands how the ERP works, what the backend things are happening when they set up one thing or another. On the other hand, the end users that do not have the technical background, they do not understand those things. And you should always keep in mind that you are developing a screen for one particular group of user. And always you need to apply different rules when you are designing the screen. For instance, for end users, you really need, like for users who use the screen for their day-to-day operations, you really need to see how many clicks they do to get to some point, right? However, if you are designing the configuration screen that people only go once in a year, you don't really have to bother about that. You need to bother about different things. So I guess that's an important step. Just ask yourself who will be using that, and you should really use different approaches in designing those things.
Yeah, those are good comments. What I'd add to that though, guys, is what gets forgotten sometimes is accessibility. Blind people, tactile, disabled people, so forth and so on. So it's another aspect of usability or design that you want to make sure that you're including everybody. So that sometimes gets forgotten in that whole usability framework. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was I participated with the Xbox guys. They had a building set up over there in Redmond, Washington. They had two-way mirrors in many rooms. And they were bringing people off the street. They literally were bringing people off the street with a promise of a game or something like that. And they literally sit them right in front of a PC, and they just ask them to try to do things, and they just observe how they struggled or didn't struggle, or how many times they had to click on things before they could figure it out. And they created a lot of statistics around that too. So usability can be, instrumented like that. It could also be, focused on accessibility. It can also be focused just on in general usability. Is it intuitive? Is it discoverable? Well, guess what? Developers don't usually focus on those things, and that's why I think it's really important on a team development. Even though it might seem like an extra amount of time or extra expense, it's still worth bringing a designer on board up in the front, or at least when you're designing the UI, because if you don't, you're going to pay for it on the backside. You're going to be redesigning the UI, which has to redesign the code, especially if it's MVC or MVPC or whatever it is your design model is. But the whole point is that by doing the design up front, like doing security up front, you're not going to have to redesign a lot of things going down the pike, motivated over usability issues or motivated over security issues. So it seems like one of those things like, we'll do that later. But no, that really should be focused when you're doing a project focused on up front. It's really an issue that is really going to bite you if you don't really pay attention to it right up front, especially on accessibility. And I don't know if you folks have worked on that with, contrast colors and things about Windows. The Windows team about 20 years ago had an entire team focused on accessibility. That's why in Windows there's a huge accessibility. Even on the phones, Apple has done that with iOS. Accessibility is very important too. So it's part of the whole design of a UI.
What we've also learned from our side here, especially dealing with your customers, or when you do the implementation at your customers, we almost went to the approach of, we call it like the cell phone training. As an end user, and you buy yourself a new phone, iPhone or whatever, you kind of self-learn on the phone, and you get along and you continue because it's very intuitive. And what we found with other ERPs was the amount of effort and time you need to spend training the staff members just to actually work on the screen, and also the amount of information on screens on other ERPs that we found. It normally put a lot of pressure on the staff from training. And I think especially with Acumatica's UI and the less amount of clicks needed to be clicked on those things, that definitely helps out with the user actually accepting and learning the system much faster than I would assume that what we found with any other ERP as well. So maybe just, as a comment to that.
Yeah, well, part of user design too is consistency, right? So, people are used to, just like you're expecting at least, there's a file and then you'll be able to open the file or close, or, I'm being very simplistic here, but, people know because through repetitive use, this is what their expectations are. That's why sometimes when you do a redesign of a UI, you can really get upset users because they can't figure out how to use it again because they were so used to one way or another. So, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I was going to say one of the biggest roadblocks we had was just the fact that, you pressed like the send credit card information, and the fact that the screen didn't, like, even though I would have like a pop-up that said credit card information received, or like a green circle, or just the fact that we didn't redirect away from the screen. That just, like, these people would get like 5 or 6 calls a day, and they're like, they just couldn't register that the credit card had gone in. So, and things that like my entire UI design philosophy, again, 99% of my work is just B2B, oh, hey, this is how it works. You can talk to the, 10 or 15 people that might use it. And yeah, it was just like, it was a bit of a paradigm shift. So that was actually, helped me grow as a developer for sure. And it was actually quite fun to work through those challenges at the end of the day. But
that's a great point, Kyle, too, about support, because that's where a lot of the costs creep in on the backside if you don't pay attention on the front side. We always say that design and development, getting the bugs early is a lot less expensive than getting the bugs later, right? Well, design's the same way. And so I don't know why we treat design any different than software design, but unfortunately, it seems to be a stepchild, in the overall project management, and it gets, well, we'll do that later. Well, you get bit by that if you don't really pay attention up front.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the whole workflow is driven by it. So yeah, no, it was definitely lesson learned for sure.
I'd be curious, Dimitri, and guys that have been here a while, because I haven't, but when you guys went from the old UI to the new UI back in version 2017, I'd be surprised if there weren't a lot of support calls increases there too. But it seemed like that transition, from what I can tell, was pretty smooth, given whatever smooth is. But lessons learned there might be something we could share too. What, the amount of effort we put into making sure that transition wasn't a huge juxtaposition for users. I know we allowed them to use the old one for a while and then migrate over, and that's a great strategy too. But
I don't have the exact statistics, but my personal impression is that the majority of people who were complaining about the new UI were the developers, and our internal developers, external developers, everyone liked the old one better, but all the end users, I think all the end users went with the new one pretty smooth.
Yeah, that's because they had to learn new class libraries.
Developers are humans too. They don't like humans.
And for the developer, it's really a different movement patterns that they use. So for instance, for me as a Acumatica developer, I go through like all the screens pretty much in the same portion, right? I go to the sales order screen, to the sales order configuration, then to the cash sales screen, to the charts of accounts, to the general ledger. I visit all the screens relatively in the same proportion. But for the end users, it's not that. They just use like their 5 screens. They never go to the other screens. So I guess when you have bigger list of the screens that you can access with one click, as in the old UI, yeah, you would like the old UI better. But if you just have the big buttons for your favorite screens and you can pin them, right? And you just visit those 5 screens, that's better for end users. Yeah. And I mean, that's my experience as well. We do work with Acumatica internally, and it's a different experience. When I manage my team, right, when I go to the Acumatica internal portal and I review like time cards submitted by my team and the cases queue, I use the system differently, and I feel that difference versus when I'm developing something.
Comment on that was when it changed over, all the old sitemap, if you had a sitemap customization that loaded up, it didn't show up in the new UI. Not until 6-7 months later, they finally got that straightened out. But now it doesn't matter. I just type the screen in the search. That's how I don't need to go to the menu at all. As far as the portal, in my opinion, if you're customizing a portal, you're a real warrior, because that's a beatdown on portal. The portal.
I totally agree with you, Terry.
The portal is, you've got to understand which code's running on which website. And it's hard. It's difficult.
Yeah.
Objects seem the same, but they're not. And my
But
last
now,
thing is on your B2B, B2C. I have a client. I've rewritten CRM from the lead all the way up to the customer and vendor for B2C, which I have 8 subtypes of a B account now. It works pretty good, but things that a customer needs is physical and mailing address. They don't have billing, they don't have shipping, they don't have many of those things, and they are confused by seeing them there. So you got to simplify the thing down, but I still have business customers that need that. So what I've done is straight inheritance of the B account to allow for my rules engine to be there in that graph. And then I've made my own one-off screens, and it works good. I've, like I say, 7 different B account types, and they seem to work well.
Yeah, but Dimitri, didn't we improve the portal a little bit, make it a little bit easier? You don't have to be quite the samurai warrior developer anymore, right? Or do you?
yeah, we've improved the portal customization in 21R1 significantly. So previously you had to do some tricks to enable the customization on the portal. So right now it's the same mechanism that works on the main site. So you just go there, you click create customization project, and you do that without any additional tricks. So yeah, now the portal is more customization friendly.
The last one I worked on was 20, so it wasn't there then.
Yeah.
And Kyle, you in this particular project, you were the warrior because you did use the old portal, right? And so, what were some of your challenges there? And were what did you have to do?
Well, the first thing is just how you have to use a SQL update to add the sitemap entry for the customization project editor to get in there. I think, yeah, you have to add it to the portal map. But yeah, I mean, what was kind of nice about this project is that I only had one Acumatica customer portal to maintain because it's kind of it's a very sort of integrated. The integration, I have yet to find another genetic testing business that wants me to pick this up, and it's kind of a monolith. So yes. Really, I appreciate the fact that you say I'm a warrior, but luckily, I mean, I'm not like Robert, who is he's trying to get some customization essentially published out to hundreds of customer portals. But no, the changes in 21R1 are welcome, and I've certainly I'm nudging Nextgen to essentially upgrade because I'm just like, hey, we could do even more stuff easier and it would take less time, Right. So yeah. The fact that things are constantly moving, I usually I find myself gushing to my own clients. It's like, oh, even if they're like, we already bought the software, you don't need to sell it to us again. But I appreciate that. Yeah, we have these customization project upgrades for the Acumatica customer portal in 21R1. But that being said, though, I mean, they have dashboards, so the clinics have dashboards in the Acumatica customer portal. So, we're pulling that genetic testing data out to the clinics using Acumatica dashboards and all that sort of stuff. So as much as we like to joke around about it being kind of a challenge, I mean, I still managed to do it. Not like, and I'm not exactly like super special, like, so I think they're still completely usable tools. Right. But yeah, no, I mean, I think going forward, it was a huge tool, and it was a huge selling point to say, hey, like, in fact, during the pre-sales process, they were considering using a third-party sort of development shop to write a portal from scratch. And then eventually we just kind of showed them what was available, and they just said, okay, you know what, you guys just, we'll buy the portal and you can customize the portal. And they certainly haven't regretted their decision. So,
hey Kyle, do they use the mobile client at all? The Acumatica
they do.
mobile?
They don't actually.
Okay. I was curious.
Yeah. They their lab is kind of small still at this point, just because they're still. I mean, it's getting bigger, but since they're just kind of a startup, I can imagine though it's at one point. I mean, they're gonna have when they want to essentially do some more work, perhaps in the lab, and the computer is less than a desk chair turn away, that will certainly be a much bigger focus, I bet. And just having that ability, hey, it's just sitting there, we can turn it on whenever you guys want. It's just the breadth of tools available is awesome. It's like I feel like I'm a magician sometimes.
So Kyle, I want to redirect the conversation a little bit to have some time around, some of the other challenges you had. And, I think being an ex-biologist myself, I was really interested in the interface, the integration piece that you had to do, to be able to interact with the machine that basically did the analysis of the genetic material and, the challenges you had there and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about, where that were some other challenges and how you overcame them?
Yeah, the other challenge was just, I guess, integration. Like obviously you can design a workflow, but if that workflow doesn't touch other workflows, then it has limited usefulness. I mean, that's when things really start to multiply. So we had integration challenge with the machine. So this genetic testing machine that essentially scans. It takes sort of the human genome, as it's mapped, and then compares it to the scanned genome of these cells, and then compares okay, so I guess they came up with essentially the gold standard for length of chromosomes, and then compare it against the embryo's length, and then try to figure out, okay, what percentage, maybe slight loss or gain, which is essentially this the metric for success or viability of an embryo is how much of a complete set of genetic material does a chromosome have, or does an embryo have. So, a very complex machine, certainly not designed for standard integration. I think honestly, after talking to the founder, who had actually worked at several different companies, he's one of the only companies that even attempts to do this sort of integration. So it was just a matter of trying to get your arms around the data as it exists in the machine and the data that you want it to be in Acumatica. Luckily, we had a on-site resource, with Thermo Fisher. Without that on-site resource, it would have been very difficult to accomplish, because then it's like, on-site. Well, I guess it's the on-site resources on both the customer and the machine end, or the client and the machine end. Just understanding. Really, it's just about lots of meetings with the client, breaking down the biology behind it, or in a more general case, the business behind it. What does everything mean? How does it? Because you're going to have to do some sort of translation 9 times out of 10, and then, it's just navigating the interface. I guess that was just the challenge. The challenge was just having a nice, clear, open communication with the client about what the data means, and at the end of the day, as long, if it gets in right, then you can. If it's dirty, then you can make it work. As long as the data doesn't get changed or interpreted incorrectly, because especially in this sort of field, the difference between this embryo is viable and this one is not, that has huge implications down the line. And significant customer validation was also required. After we had completed the integration. But
Kyle,
Yeah.
what kind of integration was it? Was it API based or was it import export,
I
ETL? Like,
I wish it was like essentially it was navigating through a file structure. Sort of Thermo Fisher had essentially navigated the file structure of this server essentially. So imagine you have like 5 machines and all 5 machines talk to a single server, and the server sort of like handles starting of stopping of the machines, downloading of the test result data. But what they had done is they had essentially just mapped the file system of the server to a URL path, so like a file path to a URL path. And you had to just know where to navigate in, where files were stored based on, essentially, we had to make sure that identifiers were correct on both the ERP side and on the server side. I guess I'm just going to call it the Ion Reporter server because that's actually what it's called. And then after that, you download tab separated like TSV files, and then just parse TSV files to get.
So were you using the data providers and the import scenarios? Is that how you guys worked it?
No, actually. So since we had this completely custom screen, I wrote essentially sort of a separate DLL that kind of like gave me some nice methods to translate, like, hey, get this file and return this sort of interface. So it was completely custom from the ground up. Yeah, we didn't use any import scenarios or anything like that. Just to make it a tighter integration. I mean, that's really that's the big thing. Yeah, I guess that was really
the question I have, Kyle, is, was the process automated? I mean, how did you get to the file? Could you query the machine to say, hey, I need this data? Or you had to go to the machine and make sure that they hit a button that basically outputted a file, and then you could query. I mean, how did that work? I mean, was it automated at all? Did you make it automated?
That's a to-do item, actually, just recently. I mean, again, we're talking about a very small piece of their overall piece of or I guess their overall vertical. And of course, like, when it comes to certain priorities, but that's the next step. So essentially what they do is they manually run it on the machine side. The Acumatica generates a CSV, which essentially defines all of the samples and their positions, because you have to imagine it's like a little tray with it's like a checkerboard kind of thing. Acumatica defines the position of all the samples, exports a CSV, which then gets uploaded to the machine. The machine runs, and then Acumatica can then it knows where everything is because it's defined where everything is. And then once the machine is done, then you press just import results, and the results come in. But that's an upcoming feature, actually. They want to, because this machine can run for like 7 or 8 hours, and maybe it ends at 3 a.m. and the nature of the integration is such that performance is a bit of a consideration. So now they're like, can we just schedule all this, please? Because we're sick of waking up at 3 a.m. to download the results, because the server is not particularly very fast. So, and long story short, that is a feature to be rolled out in the near future to automate the import. But other than that, I mean, it's completely, with Acumatica being sort of the source of record, defining where the positions are, and then also, or telling the machine where the positions are, and then downloading results from the machine, essentially knowing where each sample is in the machine. So, but yeah, that was, that's the machine. We had other points of integration as well. Especially with, obviously at some point we need to hit the core financials of Acumatica, or else what's the point of having this workflow in the ERP, so what we have also is sort of an inventory receipt situation where this sample, Nextgen tells Acumatica, hey, we just received a box with 10 samples in it from this clinic, and it's related to this patient, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at that point, the system generates AR invoices that are predefined based on a set of billing rules. So for example, okay, the patient's going to pay for this, so that would be B2C, or the clinic's going to pay that, so it would be B2B. Or we're gonna put in these inventory items, and we're gonna hit these GL accounts, and etc. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but the fact that we had this data sort of in the ERP just gives it a nice sort of cohesive transfer. I mean, obviously we could do that with API, or we could do that with like a web API or something like that. But I'm sure, as you guys know, in this day and age, everyone's trying to reduce the number of pieces of software that they have to work with to get their job done. So I would say, the machine integration is cool from a scientific perspective, but really, I thought what was really cool was being able to create another Acumatica module. In the same way that something like field services, hits core financials. I mean, this is like the genetic testing module. And as soon as we demonstrated that, I don't think they went into that with that thought. I think they just were like, hey, we just want to like have a couple tables we can store stuff in. But in our demo, we mocked up some screens and showed them what we could do. And, obviously then like the gears start turning, and here we are with a pretty amazing piece of software now, it's 12 months down the line.
So what about so you mentioned, so it's B2C, B2B, and then the other aspect, of course, it's a financial system in itself, right? It's about getting paid, how do the payment transfers happen? That you talked about this before, that, the credit card integration and so forth. How did that go?
The credit card integration was just sort of an off-the-shelf. We just use an off-the-shelf product so that they can manually charge cards, and then we use a separate provider for essentially a click-to-pay workflow. Mm-hmm. So the clinics can then pay with, if they want to pay with a credit card, or if they kind of get billed on a statement. But then we handle our customer, or we handle their customer work through a sort of click-to-pay integration. And the click-to-pay integration, it works. You set out, I guess, that's not very interesting, admittedly, but at the end of the day, it's like, you're like, okay, we need to get this data in, we need to get this data out, and then you look at how that gets accomplished in Acumatica, and you look at how that gets accomplished on sort of their side. And it's like, I like to joke that I'm like a digital tradesperson. I'm like plumbing. I'm essentially like, if you can call me up and say, oh, I want a new shower in my bathroom. It's like, okay, I'm gonna hook up to the water line and then plumb it in. But anyway, just obviously dealing with that B2C. I mean, eventually we realized that it would probably be better suited to use a product sort of off the shelf, like somebody else to handle the click to pay, after we kind of suffered through trying to make it more sort of general user friendly. And I differentiate that from user friendly, because it's like not even an ERP user, it's just like some random person off the street. And then once we integrated with the click to pay service, then essentially all the problems just evaporated. So,
hey Kyle.
So just to be clear, you actually was doing that integration, and then the decision was, well, why don't we just use a third party to do that?
Yeah, we eventually searched around long enough. It was kind of a patch, because we needed to get it up and running really fast, just due to certain circumstances. So we didn't. The circumstances did not allow us to. It was kind of like, hey, this is how we can solve this problem. Mm-hmm. And constantly we were looking for somebody to provide us I wouldn't say constantly, but at first it worked just enough for it to, be okay. And then eventually came to realize that these guys can't be taking, 5 or 6 phone calls a day. They got lots of things to do. They're a small team. They're a startup. And we eventually found an off-the-shelf click-to-pay solution that we could integrate with.
Yeah, Kyle, real quick, you mentioned a demo, and I'm all about demos. So I'm on the sales side here and technical resource. But did you guys do a discovery, and that's why you showed them the whole GL process, which got their gears going and got them excited about working with you? I mean, how did you go about that discovery, or did you guys just happen to just say, they're going to need this, we're going to put this in the demo and show it to them?
Yeah, it was essentially, it was like they're going to need this. And these guys are actually not the first clients that we've done this for. So in the back of our mind, we had already kind of sort of gotten people really excited and kind of about Acumatica in the past. So I guess in our mind, we're like, okay, we're just going to, like, they came to us and said, hey, we need essentially a way to store this information. And then in the back of our mind, it was like, okay, well then in the demo, we'll just show about how much we can integrate with.
That's really cool, because that just goes to the, we believe that demos are really the way to get people excited about the product. And that's just another proof point for me, at least.
Yeah. And also just opening your mind, or I guess like changing the paradigm of ERP as just sort of like dollars, cents, to really it's just about a business operation standpoint.
Right. Solving business issues, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Well, I mean, ERP does, if we remember the acronym, Enterprise Resource Planning, right?
Yeah.
ERP. So it's all about, resource and what's a resource, right? How do you define a resource? Well, in the genetics business, this machine that does the integration, I mean, the machine that's analyzing the genetics of the embryos is part of that, right? And so how do you integrate it? And you mentioned, hey, we just write a module. So whatever business is out there, whatever your resources are, whatever the things you work with, whatever is your widgets or what value you offer, you can create integration through web services, or you can, build a module and it's just, you have your financials there as modules, and you have your business module that's your core business value that you offer your customers, which in this case is genetic testing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, and we've done this for essentially, a couple different other clients, like people who sell insurance and bonds to contractors and other, I mean, just like a lot of different companies where it's just like their business, and then it just touches on the financials just enough to that linking the two together, like it's outside the bounds of what you would, Acumatica is not going to make a genetic testing module, never roll that out, but but yeah, it touches just enough, and that it's like really, really helpful for them to have those two linked together.
Yeah. So why don't we wrap up with, reflecting upon, some of the things you learned, some of the, when I have these, I have bi-monthly meetings with the developer MVPs, people that are in this virtual room, if you will, and I always ask them, why don't you share with me things you struggled with, so that we can talk about it, or things that you learned that you want to share with the group. So I always want to, so I want to end, with a real positive. So what are some of the cool things you learned that the platform could do that made your life easier as a developer? Can you share any of that?
The platform. Okay. The big thing is the extensibility. So essentially we had a workflow for one product line, which was, so the workflow is they have a requisition, which is like the clinic saying, we want genetic testing. And then they have a biopsy worksheet, which is here are the samples that are going to be arriving at your door in a couple of days. And then that goes into a biopsy receipt, which is like an inventory receipt. And then it goes into the testing, and then it goes into the PDF release. So we kind of defined that first product line. And as I'm, of course, what happens is that as soon as we complete that one product line, they're like, okay, great. we got another product line. So the first product, their main core business is this sort of like PGT. It's called PGTA, and it's the length of it's like the segmental length of the chromosomes. But then they have another one called PGTM, which is, if you and your partner both have an inherited genetic disease, or if you're a carrier for genetic disease, obviously if you both have a child, that you have that combination, that 4x4 combination, where they have a 50% chance of your child being a carrier, or a 25% chance of your child being affected by that disease. Now, it's assuming that it's a recessive gene, but
Right.
But anyway, from the workflow standpoint, it's the same. It's essentially the same thing. So it's the PGTM requisition. So now we have two different requisitions, and both of those requisitions now flow down to a single biopsy. Now, a requisition has, patient information, it's got partner information, it's got clinic information, all that sort of stuff. And there's certain business logic that you want to assign to essentially a base requisition. Then you can it's essentially a question of inheritance. And I mean, obviously C# has, in .NET, I mean, we have inheritance, so it's not earth shattering, but the one thing that I really appreciated, and I did actually, this was sort of the first times I really leveraged this in the platform is how the Acumatica framework also respects inheritance, and how you can have this sort of a base. I had essentially a base requisition graph where I do things like, require an email in certain circumstances, or whatever business logic you want to essentially put on the base information, and then I could then take that and run with it, and then put things like extend it out depending on the different product lines. And now these guys have 3 separate product lines, which, again, the fact that the fact that the XRP framework can just just do that sort of inheritance and extend out different ways, and everything, there wasn't a whole lot of difficulty doing that, was huge. I mean, it's one thing to have a nice framework that, you can whip up a screen really fast, but as soon as you need to start whipping up 3 or 4 screens that are nearly identical, except for some little extra bits, I mean, that was definitely when I was like, wow, okay, fantastic. It's just saving me a whole lot of maintenance troubles, and a whole lot of also a lot of code reuse. So yeah, that was definitely from a platform. That was a lesson learned on the platform side. But I wanted to actually chime in also on the lessons learned from a more project management side. And the big one is when it came to this B2C thing, and I think we've talked at length now about how it was a challenge, and and I think the big thing is the impetus was I needed to solve this problem. And as developers, even if it's like maybe not your problem, it's like you want to swoop in and you just want to be the savior, you want to save the day. And definitely from a project management perspective is I swooped in, and we were fighting through this sort of B2C, this sort of issue with the customers, and or some customers not quite getting the whole workflow. And I realized very quickly that even if you swoop in to solve the problem, if you don't fully execute, now you are the problem. So definitely, like before it's like saving somebody in the raging river. It's like, okay, you got to make sure you protect yourself first before you like just jump into the raging river and grab onto the person, because then you're both in the river and nobody's better off for it. So, and what else? I guess then also, I mean, that combined with just extending my knowledge on interacting with the base Acumatica functionality. Every project, it's about how to not reinvent the wheel, and how to leverage the existing tools, and really, use the framework to its fullest.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate you being on and talking about your project and sharing, the lessons learned and what you like about the platform and what your challenges were and so forth. I think it's useful for people to understand a variety of different scenarios and how you approach problems and so forth. I think sharing that with the greater community is a great thing. So I appreciate you coming on and talking about this and sharing your experience with this particular customer and with the platform. So thank you very much. Now I understand, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So getting this knowledge, and you were in the hackathon last year. I believe you're coming to this year's hackathon, so you got to start thinking of some ideas to share with your teammates and things. And I'm hoping that we already have a pretty good number of people coming so far, and so I'm getting excited about sharing all this new product experience. And building different teams at the hackathon. So I think it'll be fun again this year for you, hopefully.
Definitely, yeah. I'm super excited to join. I had a great time last year. Definitely one of those things where I was like, man, what's this going to be like? But you come out, you get to spend, I guess 2 days. I mean, obviously not continuously for 2 days, but.
No.
With some like-minded individuals.
Most of us are gray hairs or balding. So I made it. When we first did this 5 years ago, I said, we're not doing a 24-hour hackathon. There's no way. I'm too old to do that. And plus, I don't want to be wrecked, and neither does anyone else for the rest of the summit. So that's why we split it. I mean, if you want to work all night, go for it. But yeah.
Yeah,
so,
and
I know Robert. He'll be bringing some hardware with him for his project, like he did last year. And
I got some
people are starting to think about it.
stuff.
Yep, your IoT stuff. So we should. So I'm looking forward to the summit this year and seeing you guys in person. And the hackathon will be our first chance to do that and work on some fun projects. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys live.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, it'll be a good time.
Yeah. So again, I'm just going to wrap up and say thank you very much again. And till next time, coffee and code. And as what we always say at the end of our blogs, we have a little tagline that says "Happy coding." So happy coding to everyone, and may all your projects go smoothly.
Yeah, that's the goal. Thanks a lot.
All right,
thank you guys.
Care. All right, bye-bye.